I.M.D. head, clearing up some confusion about what headship and submission really are all about in the Bible. Redeeming the Time Brothers podcast, a podcast by Gene Kissinger and Norman Kissinger, two brothers who spent their lives in ministry and raising large families. Our desire is to provide a digital place for those who long to belong. This is a series called Maximum Marriage. We're in the fourth segment of this series. It's out of a book by John Maxwell that I did a class on years ago. I was looking at some of the material. I thought it was 10 years ago. It was more like 20 years ago. It was a long time ago that I did the class, and I'm glad to be able to revisit this material. We have been talking already in our series of Maximum Marriage about how we can either be competing with each other or completing each other. We already looked in the series about how we need to have priorities, where our relationship with God is the priority, then our mate, then our children, and then our job. And once we have that right alignment of priorities, we have God's supernatural power and provision to be able to fulfill the roles and goals as husband and wife, and mother and father within this marriage relationship. And then you had really getting rid of your fig leaf, learning to bring about intimacy within the marriage, where we learned in Genesis chapter 3 that God designed basic elements or components to intimacy. One was leaving your father and your mother, leaving any controlling influences or relationships. One was cleaving to your mate so that you're sticking with them, you're not stuck with them. Another was unity, where you work on your problems together and see the problem as something that's out there that the two of you together as a team can work on. And then we looked at the issue of intimacy, of not sort of trying to micromanage your mate, but instead allowing God to make your mate good, and your job is to love your mate. Let God's job be to make your mate good. So anyway, those are some of the things that we looked at. And if you missed any of those, the YouTube channel has those videos on them. RTT Bros is the YouTube channel. You can look it up, and just those initials, RTTBROS, and it should bring you to the channel, and then you can look for Maximum Marriage within it. You should be able to find it. Now, so this fourth segment is I.M.D. head. The old joke, the old preacher joke, is that there's in heaven, there's these two lines that men are divided into, and this one massive line says henpecked husbands, and the other line, there's just one little old tiny guy, and a reporter in heaven goes over to ask him why he's in the line he's in, and he looks up at the sign, and it says husbands who are the head of their house. And the reporter says, "Were you the head of your house?" He says, "No, I'm just here because my wife told me to be." This issue of headship and submission or submission has kind of been so overused and misunderstood within the context of Christianity that it's sort of fallen into the realm of jokes almost, where we don't truly understand what it means. And we need to cover some of that so that we can have a proper understanding as men what our role is as the husband, and women what is their role in relationship to us. How do we work together as a team, and what does headship mean, what does submission mean, and how can we have that played out in our life in a biblical way so that our marriage is following a biblical pattern rather than the pattern of the world, which quite honestly is not a good pattern. So some of the misconceptions about headship. I guess the reason there have been so many jokes made about it that we'd rather laugh than cry. And here's the truth. Some of the misconceptions about headship is there's some that believe that headship means a dictator. And what they would see is the husband is this guy that walks around barking like a drill sergeant at everybody that's under the sound of his voice, snapping them to it. He doesn't walk softly and carry a big stick. He walks loudly and carries a big stick. And it's this super hyper authoritarianism that is there, where it's just this top down drill sergeant kind of a mindset, and it's almost with the power of your will you're going to make everybody do exactly what you want them to do, and there's only two ways, your way or the highway, and there's really, there's just no freedom within a family structure like that. And so there's this dictator, this very angry man, this very, very almost bullying man. And then another concept that's maybe a misconception is this guy, he thinks then in order to be the head of the home, he's got to be perfect, and everybody around him has to be perfect. And so it's not so much that he's a bully, but he's definitely so drilled into this thing, and he thinks that perfection is what's required, and he's stressed out all the time, and there's no relational component to it. It's just sort of a rule following on everybody's part, including his part, but it's this idea that everybody's got to be perfect, and he's got to be perfect. And of course the reality of human life, married life, family life is none of us are perfect. We're not June and Ward Cleaver, and it's not My Three Sons, where we have three idyllic children that just sort of walk around in cardigans and slacks, ready to go to church at a moment's notice. No, instead we live in the real world where there's real problems and real issues, and we try to work out whatever this idea of headship and submission is. We try to work it out in the real world. But then the third concept is the guy who just sort of goes around. He has no idea what headship or submission means, but he's heard it in the Bible, and he's heard preachers preaching about it, so he's constantly going around harping on it, and maybe even giving speeches about it, but he has no idea what it means. I.M.D. head might as well be empty head for him. He just has no idea. So how do we move away from these misunderstandings of what headship means and move into a proper biblical role where we're relating with our mate, where we're both free to be individuals, and we're not somehow trying to squash the individuality of every other member of the family in order to somehow be the head? What does that look like, and what does that mean? Now, the biblical meaning of headship and submission has to do with two concepts on the part of the man. Number one concept is the issue of authority and what that is and is not, and then the issue of servant leadership, what it means to love your wife and serve your wife. Those are two components to what biblical headship is all about. Now, very first thing that we have to get into is whenever we talk about authority in the Bible, and submission in the Bible, sometimes there's people that hear that word submission, and what they think that means is that somebody is better than somebody else. So that if the husband is the head of the home, there are a lot of women that assume that what that means is somehow they are less than. And so, in math, there's greater than, less than symbols. They assume that if this is true, that the man is called to be the head of the home, then that somehow makes the wife less than the husband. That's not at all what the picture is. In fact, Jesus, the second person of the Holy Trinity, is named Jesus, the sinless Son of God, and he was called to be in submission to his Father. He was the same words that talked about submission here, the wife to the husband. He was submitted to God the Father, but he was no less than God the Father. He wasn't less than God. He was equal to God. In fact, whenever he talked like that, the Pharisees got all worked up because they felt like he was, they wanted to kill him because he was claiming to be equal with God, and he was claiming to be equal with God. But he was still submitted to God. And the word in the Greek, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, hypomone, I barely pronounce English correctly, but if I'm getting it right, hypomone, it means to order under. And it would have been used in a military structure, where there was order within this group of people, and you had to have that order in order for that group of people to function properly. And within families, you have to have that order. You have to have that structure and that order within a family system. And so if you don't have that order, you have chaos. If you have a double-headed snake, you're going to have a little bit of problem. There was a double-headed snake in Florida. It was I want to say it was a king snake, maybe a coral snake, had two heads. The snake's name was Gertrude. And the old joke was the reporter writing about the snake said that it had the same internal organs, same heart, same digestive system, same that, but it had two heads, two mouths, two tongues, two brains. And the problem with Gertrude is she didn't know whither to slither. They didn't know which way to go. There was kind of a constant warring. And if you have a two-headed marriage, you have two different directions that are going on, and it can be problematic. And so that's why God has this ordering under concept. It has nothing to do with one being better than another or another being a dictator over the other. Instead, it was very relational, and we'll get into that in a moment. But let's talk about this authority too and what it means. Think about an analogy here. Suppose a policeman lights up the lights behind you on your way home, and school's going to be starting next week. Memorial Day will be Labor Day this weekend, this Monday, and the police will be out in full force. And inevitably, there's going to be people that are going to be pulled over, and if they're wise, they will pull over their car. Now, they're not pulling over their car because the policeman is physically stronger than them. They're not pulling over their car because the policeman has a bigger gun than they have. They're pulling over their car because the policeman has authority. There's a delegated authority to the policeman that we've given over to him to enforce the laws. And so we like it when a policeman stops a speeder that goes 100 miles an hour down the road our kids play on. We like it when the policeman pulls that guy over, because that policeman then saved our family's life by exercising his delegated authority. Now, we're not always excited about the policeman pulling us over when we're 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, but he's still doing his job. He's still exercising his delegated authority. Now in our civil structure of the government, the way that we're structured, you're the one that delegated that authority to him. You're the one that allows those flashing lights to have meaning. You're the one that would stop when he would blow a whistle or give a command. It was a delegated authority. And so when we're talking about authority, we're not talking about somebody that just kind of walks, somebody that just puts on a uniform and goes out and starts telling people what to do. That's not what this is. And so marriage is this institution where a husband and a wife join together in this team, where I guess that maybe if you're going to use a military analogy, where you might use a naval captain, the captain of a ship. Every naval captain has an executive officer. That executive officer is there as a backstop to that captain. He's almost a second captain. He or she is almost a second captain of that ship. He has incredible authority on that ship. If the XO talks, people listen. He's not a lowly sailor. But his job is to present alternative plans, alternative insights to the captain. But ultimately, the captain is the one that has to make the final decision and has the final culpability in the chain of command. He's answerable for what happens on that ship. The XO has incredible authority as well, but the XO doesn't have the final authority. And so when we talk about headship, we're talking about a husband and wife that are married together, where the wife has delegated the authority of headship to the husband, and the husband is the head of the wife. And he leads her with that authority, but he also will give an account to God for what he did. And I'm afraid it's going to be a frightful thing for some husbands that have abused the kind of authority that God has given them, and they have either been dictatorial or they have misused whatever authority that they have been given. They've maybe neglected the authority. They've maybe not taken the spiritual leadership. That they've not directed the family. They've not provided for their families. They've not protected their families. They've not fulfilled the biblical roles and goals of a husband, and they will be judged by God for that on that great getting up morning. But they also are given the final say in some things. His headship is where he's got to make the call. And so I think that's a helpful understanding of what it means, and it's an agreement between those two people. It's not that all men are the head of all women. The husband is the head of the wife, and it's a delegated authority. It's something that's understood between the two of them. It has nothing to do with any other individual. Now, so not only was there the issue of authority and headship, but also there's the issue of submission. The issue of being of loving her with a servant love, a servant leadership. Which means, let me read the passage. Let me read Ephesians chapter 5. This is where this comes from. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23 down through verse 25. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church and the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even